and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Oh, you know what happens when we open with that music. You are in for a treat. Jimmy Akin here with us both hours, and that music means weird questions for Jimmy Akin. Jimmy developed the reputation for being willing to take everybody's questions seriously and give it a fair hearing and a fair answer, and that has built to... We have what we might call a Jimmy Akin question. As a matter of fact, lots of people say that's a Jimmy Akin question when people ask about anything that's paranormal or alien or in that range. We call it a Jimmy Akin question. Jimmy, of course, is the host of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Weird questions today, and they're all in. Hello, Jimmy Akin. Thanks for being here.
Howdy, Elliot. How are you doing?
I am really good. I am ready for some weirdness. So I don't know how you feel about greeting you with "I'm ready for some weirdness," but there it is. That is your Uber.
I'm down with it.
Yeah,
as they say in German, das geht's.
They do say that. But then I never know what they mean when they say that. So what does it mean? Das geht's.
Das geht's means that works.
Oh, okay. All right, it works. We'll get into some weirdness. I'm delighted. I'm going to get right into it, and then we'll talk a little bit about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Look, if you don't know about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, I do not know what rock you've been under, but we'll talk about it.
You've been sleeping on it.
Yeah, but you know what? I always like it when people don't know about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, because that I feel like you've got hundreds of episodes in front of you now.
400 of them now.
Is it really 400?
Yep, last week was our 400th episode, numbered episode. We've had some bonus ones too.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Congratulations on what was the topic for episode 400?
It was listeners' mysterious experiences. So people wrote in and said, this really strange thing that happened to me. Can you offer some perspective on it? And then I would.
Oh, that's fun. All right, I'm going to get to the first weird question we have here. And weird questions sometimes come with interesting names attached. Rescue Hamster 1734 wants to know this. And Rescue Hamster, I love your question. If a pagan god were to meet Jesus and convert to Christianity, would they go to heaven if they died?
Okay, so let's split this question in half, because we need to consider this question in terms of if it happened in the real world or if it happened in fiction. Because in fiction, someone might say, well, in the real world, pagan gods don't exist, so this couldn't happen. But it could happen in fiction. And if we are applying fiction rules, well, the rules are whatever the author makes up. But in terms of the Catholic understanding of this, I would say that yes, the former pagan god would be forgiven and go to heaven. And the reason I say that is found in paragraph 393 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it is talking about demons, and it says it is the irrevocable character of their choice and not a defect in the infinite divine mercy that makes the angels' sin unforgivable. And so the reason that God doesn't forgive demons is because they don't repent. They've made an irrevocable choice, and they're not changing their minds. And that's the only reason, according to the Catechism, that God doesn't forgive them. He has infinite mercy, and so if they did repent, they would be forgiven. So if a pagan god were to meet Jesus and repent, well, then he'd be forgiven because of God's infinite divine mercy. So that's what I would say if we kind of take some real world constraints off of the situation. What about in the real world? Well, here there are a number of understandings of what pagan gods are, or what gods are, I should say. Basically, now, without going into an extensive taxonomy of how terms were used in Greek, for deities of different levels. There are different things that can be considered pagan gods in the real world. It's not just that they're imaginary. The Old Testament understanding which carries over into the New Testament, is that at least in some cases, demons became the gods of the nations. And so there were spirits that people were worshiping, and they were basically rebellious angels. According to Deuteronomy, God put each of the different nations under the tutelage of one of his sons, the sons of God being these high-ranking angels in the celestial court. And then some of them went bad, and we read about that, for example, in the book of Daniel. And so they became demons. And so a common understanding, which appears, for example, in First Corinthians, is that pagan gods are demons. And in that case, paragraph 393 applies directly, because it's talking about the reason God doesn't forgive the demons is they don't repent. So if you say, well, if something changed and even though it doesn't happen in our world, if a demon did repent, then God would forgive him. And so you could have one of these demons that was assigned to the various pagan nations that had gone bad, if that was being worshipped by the pagan nation, if that demon repented, he would be forgiven. Then there's another category, at least, well, actually, I would say two other categories, because not all of the angels that God put in charge of nations went bad. For example, he put Michael in charge of Israel, and Michael did not go bad. So that would be a case where you have, even though Michael was not considered a god, he is the same ontological class of entity as the ones that were considered gods. And Michael doesn't need to repent because he's already one of the good guys. Then there is the process by God's grace known as theosis, or deification, where humans are able to become God-like entities by God's grace. Peter already, for example, refers to us being made partakers in the divine nature, and it's been commonly understood both in Eastern Christianity and in Western Christianity, except in Protestantism, that when we die, that theosis or deification will be made complete, and we will be entities that are superhuman compared to where we are right now. And a superhuman entity of a spiritual nature is what classically could be called a god. And you even have some church fathers saying things like God became man so that man might become, or men might become gods. And if you're talking about redeemed humans as gods, well, they've already repented, so they don't need to be forgiven further. But bottom line, God's willing to forgive everybody if they'll only just repent.
Rescue Hamster 1731, thank you for a fascinating question to get us started on Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. That'll take us to the break. We'll be right back with lots more weirdness with Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live.
Catch Catholic Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1998. While praying the rosary with Paula Albertini, an Italian mystic, Mother Angelica removes the braces from her legs and begins to walk. 3 physicians independently examine her and find the healing is real.
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live, Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin for this Friday afternoon, or maybe it's Friday evening or even Saturday morning where you are. Jimmy, so I asked you what was the 400th episode, but today drops the 401th episode.
Yeah.
So what is the 401th episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World?
Well, you and I have mentioned previously here on the show about what are known as after-death communications, or ADCs. These are incidents where someone who is alive has someone, typically someone they love, typically someone they recently lost, appear to them. And they may communicate one of a number of messages. The messages tend to be short. They tend to be things like, please forgive me, or pray for me, or I love you, I'm okay, I'm happy, don't worry about me, everything's fine, very brief messages of that nature. And these are astonishingly common. A minimum is 40 to 50% of the population reports having at least one after-death communication during their life. And there is reason to think it's actually higher than that, but that's a minimum, basically half the population. Well, it turns out that you and I have also talked about here on the show the possibility that animals have an afterlife. And because the idea that they don't is not a church teaching, it is a theological opinion that is based on philosophical arguments. And so a few years ago on Mysterious World, I looked at those arguments and I conclude I don't think they're convincing. I don't think they work. And we actually have some evidence that animals do have an afterlife, or at least some animals do. So you put those two things together, you get your peanut butter on your chocolate, and you wonder, could animals have after-death communications? And there have been a couple of studies that have been done on this just in the last few years. They were published in 2024 and 2025, and they surveyed more than 1,000 reports of animal after-death communications. And it looks like animals, or some animals, may be able, like humans, to appear, for example, to their former owners. And so in today's episode 401, we're looking at the recent scientific studies that have been done of animal after-death communications.
Oh, very cool. Check it out. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, mysterious.fm. Or check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. It's one of the most popular documentary podcasts out there. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. All right, we got some weird questions, lots more weird questions for Jimmy, and this one comes from James Pepe. James Pepe 4747 actually wants to know, as far as I understand it, current physics tells us that information cannot travel faster than the speed of light, since if it did, you would, among other problems, get paradoxes. However, it seems like an angel could convey information faster than light. For example, Aquinas argues that an angel, in moving from place A to place B, can choose whether it traverses the space between those places or not. Thus, an angel could observe, say, a supernova happening light years away from Earth, and then travel instantaneously to Earth and tell us about it before the light from the supernova got here. What do you think of this? Should we think that even an angel couldn't convey information faster than light, or should we discard the idea that information can't be communicated faster than light? Or maybe some third option? Thanks.
Okay, so first I should just clarify what Aquinas thinks about how spirits can be described as being in a place, because Aquinas notes that spirits don't have physical forms and therefore they don't occupy physical space the way we do. So Aquinas thinks that the concept of location can be applied to spirits in an analogous way. You could think of it as kind of in a metaphorical way. And what he says is that you can consider a spirit, or you can speak of a spirit being in a place if the spirit is manifesting its power in that place. So if an angel's doing a miracle, let's say in your bedroom, you can say, well, the angel was in my bedroom, even though the angel doesn't literally have a physical location anywhere. And that would explain the idea of the angel being able to instantly jump to a new point without traversing the space in between. That would just mean turning off its activities in your bedroom and turning them on in your kitchen without having to walk down the hallway to get from your bedroom to your kitchen. Or it could do the latter. It could choose to progressively move where it's manifesting its abilities down the hallway to finally arrive at the kitchen. So I just want people to understand how Aquinas is conceptualizing the idea of spatial location with regard to a being that doesn't have a physical form. In terms of faster than light information transmission, you would presumably be able to have an angel do that on Aquinas's, or the model described here as Aquinas's. I'd have to technically look up that part to see where he says this, just to confirm, but it does fit with what I know of his overall theory. And so, yeah, an angel could be manifesting and, perceive a supernova light years away, and then just suddenly start manifesting here on Earth and say, this is what's happening light years away. So angelic information communication would be, to use a term for modern physics, non-local. The angel is able to get information from locations that are so far distant that they are not in communication with us yet, because the light hasn't reached us from them yet. So that all makes sense. How do we make sense of that in terms of physics? Well, conventional physics describes many situations, and it does say that there are that it's ordinarily impossible to communicate information faster than light, but that's not the same thing as an absolute prohibition. And typically physicists find loopholes that even though something may not normally be possible, there may be situations in which it would be. For example, we think about how, you'll hear people say, well, like nothing can move faster than light. Well, that's true of objects that have mass and objects in general, physical objects, but it's not true of space itself. Space itself can and does expand faster than the speed of light. So, in fact, the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light. And that has a number of interesting consequences in physics. Another loophole is there are ways to move faster than the speed of light in principle, such as what's known as the Alcubierre warp drive. There's a Mexican physicist named Miguel Alcubierre who was grading papers one night, and he had Star Trek on in the background, and he started, Next Gen, I believe, and he started thinking, is there any way in physics that you could build something like warp drive? And he realized there was. The basic idea is you have a ship that could be sitting still in its local patch of space, and then you manipulate the space around it so that in front of the ship you shrink the amount of space there, and behind the ship you expand the amount of space there. And what that has the effect of is it takes the little local bubble of space the ship is setting in and pushes it forward. And because you're manipulating space, which is able to expand faster than the speed of light, you could make this little local bubble, this warp bubble, shift by warping space faster than the speed of light. And there's been a good bit of work done on this and related concepts in physics in the last number of years. And it looks like faster than light transportation is possible. In principle, we don't know how to do it. For example, the Alcubierre warp drive requires something called negative energy, which we don't know how to make in sufficient quantities to make the drive work, but it is possible in principle. So there are a variety of physicists like Michio Kaku and Sabine Hassenfelder and others who would say, we don't know how to do it yet, but it doesn't look impossible. And so if that's the case, if there are exceptions even in conventional physics to the no faster than light transportation rule, then that will entail a corollary of there's also an exception for the no faster than light information rule, because all you got to do is, let's say you got an Alcubierre warp ship, you put the message on the Alcubierre warp ship, the information you want to transmit on the warp ship, then you let it jump to a new location faster than light, and you've just moved that information faster than light. So the Alcubierre warp ship could do the same thing that James Pepe is proposing for an Angel. The warp ship could see the supernova light years from here and then jump back to Earth faster than light could travel and let us know about the supernova. So so I think that there is no intrinsic barrier to being able to do this. And since angels aren't even physical creatures, they also presumably would not be subject to the limitations that physical objects are. And we already see possibilities for how to do this with physical objects. Then there's another avenue for potentially transmitting information in a non-local, faster than light manner, and that is psychic functioning, because that's a derivative of consciousness. And consciousness, if Aquinas is right, is not dependent on material structures like our brains. And therefore, you could ask the question, well, could you get information traveling faster than light through means of consciousness, like the angelic consciousness we already talked about? And the answer is we've actually tested this. And that there seems to be evidence for psychic functioning operating faster than light. There were some remote viewing experiments that were done. It's been a while since I've looked at them, but basically, if I remember correctly, it was like we're going to look at Jupiter and we're going to predict whether or establish whether one of its moons is in eclipse as viewed from Earth or not. Is the moon between us and Jupiter, or is it not between us and Jupiter? And the remote viewers would say, okay, it is an eclipse, or it's not an eclipse, it is an eclipse, or it's not an eclipse. And they were describing where the moon is at the moment they were doing the remote viewing, not the light being received from Jupiter, because Jupiter is a number of light minutes away. And so when a moon goes into eclipse with Jupiter, it takes several minutes for the light from that to get to Earth, and the remote viewers were perceiving what was actually happening at Jupiter in the moment, not what light we were receiving from Earth, which would suggest that clairvoyance could be could be retrieving data faster than light.
Whoa. Thank you very much for the another fantastic question, James Pepe. Thank you. Let me see if I can get Malron Rawls' question in here before we have to do a break. Your recent episode on demons and the different beliefs on how people get possessed made me think, could the dark forces be targeting powerful, latent, psychic individuals? It would fit with your demons being opportunists and with Amorth's curse model. I would like to see a scientific study that would test people who have been validly possessed and exorcised to see if they test higher than a sample group.
Okay. I can get started on this. We'll need to finish the answer on the other side of the break. But I should mention what Gabriel Amorth's curse model is. He believed, and this is not a universal theory among exorcists. This is something that a certain school of exorcists think, but a lot of other exorcists would disagree. And personally, I'm very skeptical of it. But the basic idea is Amorth thinks the reason most people get possessed is because someone puts a curse on them. And I find that implausible for a variety of reasons. I think that's folklore rather than something that's actually well supported by the data. But it is an interesting question whether demons could be I also don't see how his curse model really fits with what Malrin is describing here, the idea that demons are targeting people who have significant latent psychic abilities. I don't, on Gabriel Amorth's curse model, someone takes the initiative to curse you, and that's what causes the demon to go after you. So it's not that demons are targeting people who have latent psychic abilities, it's that demons are targeting people that other people have cursed. So I don't see how that would fit in exactly. But the basic proposal is an interesting one, and we'll pick it up on the other side of the break.
Nice. We left it with a tease. Jimmy Akin, our guest. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin, our topic. We've got lots of weird questions, so hang on. More to come right after this. We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, of morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron.
Throughout history, some Catholics have been among the worst kind of villains, right? Or were they? In Cancelled, historian Steve Weidenkopf digs into the lives and controversies of some of these Catholics whose reputations have been blackened, often unfairly. He takes on the anti-Catholic versions of history and defends not only these figures, but the faith they represent. Order your copy of Cancelled today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. It's weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour and next. And Malrin Rawl asked about, is it possible that demons might particularly like to possess people who have psychic abilities? And Jimmy, you were in the midst of an answer.
Yeah, I don't know that they like to possess people with psychic abilities, but it could be that people with psychic abilities are easier targets for them because they have this greater openness to conscious things happening, and that could be something a demon exploits. What Malrin says is, I would like to see a scientific study that would test people who have been validly possessed and exorcised to see if they test higher on psychic abilities than a sample group. So let's consider that proposition. I think it's an interesting idea, and there are both possibilities and challenges here. The first is there are ways of testing to see if someone performs better than chance in ways that would be described as psychic. There are a variety of different tests. Some of the people, and classic ones include things like card guessing. Am I looking at a circle, a star, wavy lines, whatever. But there are other ways of doing it too, including ways that people may not even be consciously aware of. And this can be done entirely by machine without the person having to volunteer or give an answer. This is sometimes referred to, or a form of this is sometimes referred to as presentience testing. Sentience means feeling. And so you can look, for example, at the subconscious physiological markers that a person is displaying and see things like, okay, let's say we sit a person down in front of a computer and we have periodically the screen put out a bright flash.
Okay.
Well, our pupils contract when they're exposed to more light. So you would expect what would happen would be the flash goes on and then the person's pupils contract. But they've done testing where, better than random chance, the person's pupils start contracting before the random flash. And it looks like their body is anticipating the flash that's about to come, even though it's random and they have no way of knowing when it's going to come. And that's a form of presentience, or feeling the flash before it arrives. And so you could have some very precise tests done of abilities that the person may not even be aware that they have, which is part of what Malron's talking about here. He mentions latent psychic abilities. That would be ones the person isn't aware that they even have. So there are ways to test this. So that's a good thing. There is a challenge, though, in terms of looking at people who have been validly possessed and exorcised and seeing whether or not they have such abilities. The chief problem, other than consent, is privacy concerns, because just like, medical doctors don't reveal, oh yeah, this patient had, here's a list of all the cancer patients I've had. Similarly, the church doesn't say, here's a list of all the people that have been possessed.
Yeah.
And so, because that's kind of a delicate matter, and so there are privacy concerns, because these people's privacy needs to be protected. But suppose you overcame that. Suppose you were able to get a list of enough to do a good study, and suppose they consented. They gave informed consent. Well, you could run the test. But here's a problem. You'd be doing an after-the-fact test. You would look at people that were possessed and then seeing, do they have pronounced psychic abilities, even if they're not aware of them. And that is an after-the-fact test that wouldn't support, even if you showed that they did have pronounced psychic abilities, it wouldn't support your thesis. It wouldn't, or your hypothesis. It wouldn't support it, because you're not establishing causation between the demonic possession and the preceding psychic abilities, because you didn't test these people before they were possessed. You tested them after. And it could be that if a demon forces itself into your consciousness, that's going to blow open some doors that previously were closed. And so it could be the other way around. Instead of demons targeting people because they're extra vulnerable, it could be, because of their psychic abilities, it could be the demon, by entering the person's consciousness, is awakening psychic abilities the person didn't previously, or wasn't previously able to use. So what you really need to do in this is not a retrospective study after the possession. You would really need to do a prospective study. You need to survey people. For your control group, you need people with normal psychic functioning. Then you'd need your intervention group or test group of people with enhanced psychic functioning. And then you'd need to wait for some of them to get possessed. And possession is not very common. But that's what you need to do. You need to see, do the people who are psychic become possessed at a higher rate than the people who are not abnormally psychic. And possession is really rare. I've talked to people in the exorcistic community who, estimated that, like, if you've got a city of 1 million people, 1 or 2 might be possessed at any given time. So you need a very large need to test a very large number of people for psychic functioning, and then wait probably, I don't know, maybe 1 million people like that, and then wait a decade or more, multiple decades, to get the sample size you need given the rarity of possession. But it's an interesting idea, and it would be an interesting study to conduct.
And I thank you very much, Malrin Rao, for the question. On we go to Matthew wants to know this. In the case of Ash Wednesday, when fasting and abstinence is required, would receiving communion break one's fast or count as a smaller meal? In other words, can one receive communion in addition to eating one full meal and 2 smaller meals? Thanks, Jimmy.
Okay, so the answer is communion does not count as a meal. Also, the 2 smaller meals is not the actual language the church uses. That's some language that someone maybe at the U.S. Conference of Bishops came up with. What the law actually says is they can have 1 full meal and some food twice a day. But the Eucharist does not count. It is just not in the same category. It is not ordinary food. The Eucharist is not it's considered physical food. It's considered spiritual food. And so it simply does not count for purposes of calculating what you can have on a day of fast. And I can, especially when it comes to Ash Wednesday, because Ash Wednesday is not only a day of fast, it's also a day of abstinence, which means you can't have meat. You can't have meat at all. And so if you're looking at the Eucharist in terms of, if you're saying, I'm not going to consider what is it ordinarily considered, but what is it actually, you couldn't receive communion at all on Ash Wednesday because it's Christ's body and blood, and that involves meat. And so if communion does not violate the abstinence requirement, it also does not violate the food requirement. What the food requirement is meant to do is prevent the taking of food that would be used to assuage one's hunger. And that is not what the Eucharist is used for.
All right, Matthew, thank you very much for that question. That brings us to the break. We'll be right back. It's a very quick one. We'll be right back with lots more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley of the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Mother Angelica had a simple goal when she began EWTN: to reach the world with the gospel message. Today, EWTN is the largest Catholic media organization in the world, broadcasting in multiple languages 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We've never wavered from our mandate to proclaim the truth and majesty of the Catholic faith. Thank you for joining EWTN in this mission.
I love that music. Partly because I love that music, partly because it signals the fun we have when Jimmy Akin is here to answer weird questions. This one, I would read it this way, Jimmy, Jedi Knigget. But do you think it's Jedi Knight?
I think it's probably Jedi Knight.
Oh, okay.
It's just spelled Knigget.
You filthy Jedi Knigget. Okay, the Jedi Knight wants to know, let's say we made contact with an alternate timeline whose divergence point is after the year 100. Okay. They have a recognizable continuing Petrine ministry. Does their pope, probably called something else, have immediate and universal jurisdiction in our timeline and ours in theirs? Are we bound by each other's infallible declarations of doctrine if we've defined something they haven't, or vice versa?
Okay, so first thing, we don't know that there are any alternate timelines, but if there are, we can apply Catholic principles to this question and see what we come up with. One thing that Jedi Knight says is that their Pope is probably called something else. I assume what he's referring to is the Pope's name. Like, it wouldn't be Leo the 14th in the alternate timeline. It might be, it might be Paul. Well, no, we're not deviating too much here. That's going to be important.
Oh,
it might be, Paul the Eighth or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
Because there's no particular reason why the office of Pope would need to be called anything different. And for purposes of something that I'm going to get to in a minute, I want to keep this timeline as close to ours as possible. So it's everything about the universe is the same until the year 100, and then some event happens that causes the timeline to diverge. Okay, so does their Pope have immediate and universal jurisdiction in our timeline and ours in theirs? No. That would not be the understanding. The Pope in our timeline, let's call it Earth 1, the Earth 1 Pope, who is Leo the 14th, has jurisdiction over the earthly church in Earth 1's timeline.
Mm-hmm.
The alternate timeline, Earth 2, where we've got Paul the Eighth, he has jurisdiction over the earthly Catholic flock in Earth 2's timeline. So Leo the 14th would not be able to give orders to people on Earth 2. He couldn't change their canon law, for example. And Paul the Eighth could not give orders to people on Earth 1 and change their canon law. And as a backup for that, you would notice what would happen if they could do that. It would lead to chaos. And as St. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, God is a God of order and not a God and peace, not a God of chaos. So God would set it up this way so that if there are alternate timelines, each pope has jurisdiction over his flock in his own timeline, not some other timeline. So that's what I'd say about jurisdiction. What about, are we bound by each other's infallible declarations of doctrine? Well, that's a more interesting question, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we're talking about a universe that is as close to ours as possible. I specified the universes are the same. It's only events after the year 100 that have changed. The reason I said that is because doctrines could, if you don't impose that as a constraint, then doctrines might be true in their universe that are not true in ours. For example, now, the existence of God, that would be the same. The Trinity, that would be the same. The incarnation of Christ, that would be the same because that's before AD 100. But it could be the case that God not only in that universe created humans and angels, but also trolls and elves and things like that.
I want to go there.
And, well, depends on how nice the trolls and elves are.
I guess that's true, yeah.
In classical European folklore, elves cause you to get sick and trolls can kill you.
All right, I'm fine here.
But if they defined the existence of trolls and elves, you'd have to look at how is the definition phrased. We would not be obliged to believe that trolls and elves exist in our universe. But if it was phrased in terms of they have defined that trolls and elves exist in their universe and they're protected by infallibility due to the Holy Spirit, well, then what they defined for their universe would be true. And, we would need to believe that in their universe there are trolls and elves, but we wouldn't be obliged to believe it here. Mm-hmm. Similarly, there are either an even number of angels or an odd number of angels. Well, it could be that on earth one being an odd number, God created an odd number of angels. But on earth two being an even number, God created an even number of angels. And now we don't have data in the deposit of faith to tell us which is the case. So I don't think this is a practical subject for definition, certainly not at this point in church history. You'd have to unearth implications from the deposit of faith that nobody has unearthed. But if they had defined there are an even number of angels, the same thing would apply. We don't have to believe there are an even number of angels in our universe, but we could be obligated to believe that there are an even number of angels in their universe. So if both churches are protected from committing error when the Pope teaches definitively by the power of the Holy Spirit, we would need to recognize that truth, that what their Pope said or their ecumenical councils said was true, but we need to be very careful about how it applies to our universe versus theirs.
All right. Thank you very much, Jedi Knight. Appreciate that question. Here's one from Titus Constantine. Do stage magicians have actual preternatural gifts?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question, and there have been people, some of whom are schismatic idiots, who have proposed that stage magicians are actually using satanic magic on stage. In fact, there is a Seat of a Contest website, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to give it undue publicity, but where they have a whole video of, look at all these videos of stage magicians doing things on stage, and clearly this is all demonic. And they look like idiots because they're just doing tricks. And I can even tell you how they're doing some of the tricks in a purely natural way that does not involve anything preternatural.
Yeah.
And they frankly bring disrepute on Christianity by making, because even though they're Seat of a Contest, they are Christians. Well, they make Christians look like idiots. And so I don't recommend that kind of credulousness to these things. But among more responsible people, there have been discussions of this question. A notable discussion of this question was between Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the inventor of Sherlock Holmes, and Harry Houdini, the inventor of Harry Houdini's magic tricks. Because one of the things Houdini was interested in was testing mediums and seeing, are any of them valid? And he was very skeptical. Conan Doyle was much more open. He was what's known as a spiritualist, which means he believed in mediums and so forth. And they had an argument where Houdini was saying, look, they were called physical mediums back in his day. And the reason they were called that is they would have physical manifestations of the spirits. They would have tables levitate and turn, and they would have trumpets hover in the air and sound even though you couldn't see anybody blowing the trumpet. And they had a variety of different physical effects like that. And Houdini was saying these are just magic tricks. They're not doing anything supernatural here. Arthur Conan Doyle had a different position. He believed in physical mediums, and he would tell Houdini, it's like, you're even using paranormal abilities on stage without realizing it. And Houdini's like, dude, I'm just doing magic tricks. Unfortunately, they had the magician's ethic of you never reveal your tricks. And so Houdini could not make the most forceful case he could have if he had just said, look, here's how I'm doing it, dude. Right. So that conversation between the two of them wasn't as conclusive as it could have been. Subsequent to then, there have been many skeptics who have claimed that there is nothing at all preternatural going on. notable people like this are Penn and Teller. And they are skeptics, and then non-religious skeptics as well. And they are of the opinion that anytime a magician does something on stage, it is always purely natural. The preternatural, the paranormal, the supernatural does not exist for Penn and Teller. One thing I like about Penn and Teller is not only are they smart guys, but they also do not feel themselves bound by the magicians never reveal their tricks rule. In fact, Penn and Teller got a bad reputation initially for doing exactly that. Now, what they don't do is expose fellow magicians who are using tricks they've invented themselves. So if you put in the work to figure out how to achieve an effect on stage, Penn and Teller, even if they know how you're doing it, they will not tell other people. They're not interested in harming the careers of other magicians by exposing how they do what they do. What they will do is expose tricks that they have come up with themselves or that are like centuries old. So if you read any beginner book of magic, it's going to explain the trick. So I like Penn and Teller. I also am aware of a critique that Penn and Teller frequently make of a group of magicians known as mentalists. Okay. Mentalists don't, make doves appear out of their coat or pull rabbits out of hats or things like that. Instead, they use magic tricks to, and I'm being a little informal with the vocabulary I'm using here, but they will use magic tricks to create the effect of psychic functioning, like reading your mind or something like that. And the thing about mentalists is some of them are not as ethical as Penn and Teller in telling the audience this is just a trick. They will lead the audience to believe that maybe they really are psychic, which Penn and Teller consider unethical. And I would agree. That's lying to the audience. But when it comes to do stage magicians actually sometimes have preternatural gifts like psychic functioning, Penn and Teller's view is not universal. There are a lot of magicians, including some I know, who have said, I've been on stage and I started getting information that I couldn't have known. And so if psychic functioning exists in other contexts, you would expect it to appear sometimes in a person performing on stage. And there are reports of that, of many magicians have said, yeah, I was doing this trick and it was starting to fail. And then all of a sudden I knew what I needed to know and it succeeded. And so, so there are reports from stage magicians of having occasional psychic awareness. There have not been any studies of that. As far as I know, nobody has investigated that, but there are anecdotal reports. Also, I would mention that we do need to be really careful here in terms of what we claim, but these reports do exist and not everybody is convinced on either side. Oh, the other thing I was going to mention is parapsychologists actually have teamed up with magicians to try to eliminate fraud. So it is a common step if you're in designing your experiment, if you're testing someone and they claim some ability, to bring in a magician and say, how would you do this? And then you can use what the magician tells you to build new controls into the experiment to eliminate that as a possible explanation. And so, and as far back as 1983, the Parapsychology Foundation endorsed the idea of bringing in magicians as consultants to help eliminate fraud options in scientific tests.
Jimmy Akin, our guest, Titus Constantine, thank you for that question. A whole bunch more questions ready to go, teed up, ready for Jimmy. Check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, mysterious.fm, wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And hang on, because we got a whole hour coming up with lots more weird questions for Jimmy on Catholic Answers Live.
in fact, from Enix.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kelly, your host. It's always a good Friday when you hear that music. That's the music for Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin, and we got about a million more weird questions that we could get to today. I think the supply of weird questions for Jimmy is endless, but we gathered some up, and here they are today. Jimmy Akin, thank you for being back for another hour.
Yeah, my pleasure, Cy Kelly.
And we talked about Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. We didn't talk about the Jimmy Akin podcast at all, but Jimmy's got the week bookended. Monday, you can start with the Jimmy Akin podcast, and Friday, you can get your Jimmy Akin your Mysterious World episode. So what dropped on Monday?
This last Monday, it was on the sign of peace, and what we're supposed to do, or what we're allowed to do for the individual exchange of the sign of peace at Mass. And I go through the law and what it says, and then propose some options. One of them is not running down the aisle firing air horns to signalize your peace with others. That would be inconsistent with the principles that are established in the text.
Well, that's going to change my Sunday. Thanks a lot, Jimmy.
Well, there are other options, and you can watch the video if you want to see what those are. Coming up this next Monday, I have one on the Book of Revelation, and specifically on whether we can figure out when the Book of Revelation was written.
Oh.
And I think we can. I think we can narrow it down to basically a 7-month period.
That's fun. I love your Bible timeline. I think I've listened to all I don't want to say because then I'll have missed one, but I think I listened to all your Bible timeline ones. You know, like by a Bible timeline, I mean, when was Mark written? When was Luke written?
Yeah.
All that kind of, I love that kind of stuff. So you think you can get within a 7-month stretch when Revelation was written? All right. Check that out. And leave the air horns in the car, people. I didn't know that this was a thing that was going on, but knock it off, people. Get it together. Maybe that's an Arkansas thing. The next weird question, Marcus, TX6SO asks this. What are your thoughts on ancient civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria?
Lemuria.
Lemuria, okay. Existing 10,000 years ago and ending up destroyed, sending civilization into the Dark Ages. The theory is survivors from those civilizations spread throughout the world and brought technology to build the great wonders like pyramids and temples.
Okay, so first, let's explain what Atlantis and Lemuria are, or are alleged to be. Atlantis, according to Plato, is a civilization that existed in the Atlantic Ocean beyond the Pillars of Hercules that lead the way into the Mediterranean Sea. And so and this is the Pillars of Hercules are basically where what we would call the Rock of Gibraltar is. And so you go past the Rock of Gibraltar, you exit the Mediterranean Sea into the Atlantic Ocean, and you're going to find this, you at one point in history would have found this island there. And it could be large enough to be a continent, but you're going to find this civilization that had, among other things, wars with the Greeks, and that ended up sinking. And so that's the idea of Atlantis, and that's even where the name Atlantic Ocean comes from. Lemuria is again, and this was supposed to be continent-sized. It was a supposed continent in the Pacific Ocean. And the reason it's called that, the reason it's called Lemuria, is because there are lemurs, the animal, the lemur. Oh. There are lemurs in Madagascar and Africa and India and Australia, around these different places in that part of the world. And in the 19th century, to explain how you got lemurs in all these different places, it was proposed that there was a land bridge or continent connecting all these different places so the lemurs could roam around on it. And because they were the inspiration for this idea, it was called Lemuria. Okay. Now, there have been a variety of people for over 100 years proposing that there was one or more ancient civilizations like Atlantis and Lemuria that ended up sinking, and then the survivors of those events moved elsewhere on Earth and brought technology with them that enabled people to do things like build pyramids and other important monuments and things like that. So do we have any, and even today, there are people who propose that like 12,000 years ago, so like 10,000 BC, was about the time when this advanced civilization started. Do we have any good evidence of such a civilization? Now, you'll note I'm distinguishing this scenario that focuses on 10,000 BC from a similar sounding scenario known as the Silurian hypothesis. In Doctor Who, there was a race known as the Silurians who lived back in dinosaur times, and they themselves were reptilian. And a great catastrophe was going to come to the Earth, like they saw the meteor that was going to kill the dinosaurs coming, and they went into hibernation and periodically come out. And so a number of years ago, some scientists started wondering, well, if a civilization did exist millions of years ago, would we be able to detect it? And they concluded the odds are good that we might not be able to, because of how things break down and get dissolved and subducted into the Earth's mantle over time, that if it was really something millions of years ago, we might not be able to detect it. And that is called the Silurian hypothesis, after the Silurians on Doctor Who. So I'm not talking here about those timescales. I'm not talking about the Silurian hypothesis. I'm talking about an advanced civilization that existed during human history in the last 10 to 20,000 years. Do we have good evidence of civilization existing at that time? Yes. As an example, I mean, we know humans existed, but to give an example of a civilization existing, we have various monuments in Turkey that date back that far. There's one in particular, it's not the only one, but there's one in particular known as Göbekli Tepe, which is, it's sort of a stone enclosure that has, it has pillars with, they're not super tall pillars, but it has pillars with animals carved on them and stuff like that. It seems to have had a ritual function in its society. So we do have evidence, and only in the last number of years acquired evidence, of a civilization that dates back to that right time frame, about 10,000 BC, and we previously had not known about it, but we found these sites in Turkey and they support that. So we do have evidence of a civilization existing that far back, but do we have evidence of an advanced one existing that far back? And the answer is no, because Göbekli Tepe uses Stone Age tools. The people who built it did not have advanced technology. This is a Stone Age site. We don't have any evidence of advanced technology, and we also don't, and we should, if there was an advanced civilization, like if there was someone comparable to us, we should be digging up their machines. Even if they only had a medieval level of technology, iron doesn't decay that fast, and the continental plates it's on don't get subducted that quickly. So we should have their artifacts if they existed, and we just don't have any evidence of advanced artifacts. There are sometimes people who claim that we do, with what are called out of place artifacts, or ooparts. Like, for example, there's an object that is known as the Baghdad battery that some people have suggested, it was found in Baghdad or near Baghdad, and people have suggested it could have functioned as a battery. And so you do have some people claiming that we have some advanced artifacts, but that is not what the Baghdad battery is. I did an episode of Mysterious World on the Baghdad battery, and it is not a battery. If you pour lemon juice or some other acid into it, you can turn it into a battery, but that's not what it is. What it actually is what's known as a foundation deposit. Foundation deposits are things that people would bury in the foundation of a new building they were constructing, and they typically like put prayers and stuff on a little, they'd write them down, they'd put them in a ceramic jar, and then they'd bury that in the foundation of the building, and that's what the Baghdad battery is. So if you want more information on that, go to where you can get Mysterious World and type in Baghdad battery, and it'll come up. So we actually don't have evidence of high technology from the past. We have some impressive artifacts from the past. Like one is we found it in the Mediterranean Sea. It's a device that's called the Antikythera mechanism, and it's basically a device to predict the motions of the planets and stars. And it's essentially an ancient analog computer. It dates from a few centuries before Christ, but it's not electronic technology. It operates on wheels and cranks and things like that. So it's also not what we would consider advanced. So we just don't have evidence of an advanced civilization in the right time frame of, say, 10,000 BC. And we should, if there was an advanced civilization there. So also Atlantis, we don't have any evidence of it on the seafloor of the Atlantic Ocean, and we don't have any evidence of Lemuria on the seafloor of the Pacific Ocean or the Indian Ocean. And the thing that motivated the proposal of Lemuria, even though it was a reasonable proposal at the time, has been superseded, because what they didn't have when Lemuria was proposed was the idea of continental drift. And we now have evidence that the reason you get lemurs in these different places was not a sunken continent that connected them all. Instead, it was that they're on different continental plates that used to be connected. They used to be part of the same continent, and lemurs developed and were all over this area, and then the continent itself broke up because of the different plates under it and drifted apart. And so you don't need to propose Lemuria now to explain why you get lemurs in all these different places. Also, we've mapped the ocean floor, at least in general terms, of the Pacific as well as the Atlantic, and there's just no Lemuria down there. We'd be able to see it if there was a sunken continent. And we actually have done that. There is a sunken continent in the Pacific, but it is not Lemuria. It's called Zealandia. And New Zealand is the top of Zealandia. The rest of Zealandia is below water now, but at one point in history, the water levels were different, and you had this much larger continent-sized mass of land that was above the water line. And so there are lost continents like Zealandia, but it was not Lemuria. And so we have basically no evidence for this, and the actual explanation for why you find things like pyramids in different places is because you have people in different places, and pyramids are a basic geometrical shape that is easy for people in any civilization to come up with. And you get enough cultures around the world, some of them are going to come up with the same idea.
Thank you very much. That'll Marcus TX6SO. We got to take a break. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
The EWTN On Demand platform features 50 new podcasts every week, as well as an ever-expanding library of audio and video content. For Catholics who want to learn more about their faith, simply using their mobile device, computer, or TV. Your favorite EWTN programs are available 24/7. Visit EWTN.com and click On Demand. EWTN is the Global Catholic Network.
Weird questions for Jimmy Akin this hour. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and people get these weird questions to Jimmy, and we get to have the fun of presenting to him here and getting to hear the answers. That last one. I didn't know that Atlantis was from. It makes sense what you said about there was this island there, and they thought that's why the Atlantic Ocean is called the Atlantic Ocean, because it's over by where they thought Atlantis was. I didn't know anything.
Yeah. I haven't yet done an episode of Mysterious World on Atlantis, but I plan to. But notice some of the difficulties with the theory that was proposed, that this civilization was destroyed 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC, and yet they had wars with the Greeks.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Greeks weren't around then. That's kind of like saying the Knights Templar had a battle with the German army under Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
We're just talking two different time periods.
Yeah. All right, this one is from YouTube Binge Q1P.
Mm-hmm.
Are there, as some people think, a race of folks who are inherently evil through their DNA because they are descendants of either Cain, the giants, or both?
Okay, so these theories, especially about Cain, have been promoted for a while. This played a role, in fact, in 19th century racism here in America, where people would claim that when God marked Cain, that this mark was dark skin, and that's how we got black people, and Cain is this morally inferior person, so black people must be morally inferior. And this is just racism straight up. And it's also contrary to the core of Christian teaching, where Jesus taught us the two great commandments are love God and love neighbor. And that means you love everybody. So no matter what their skin color is, or their hair color is, or their eye color is, all that cosmetic stuff does not matter to God. We are all God's children. And so we all automatically want to be very skeptical of this claim. Another reason to be skeptical of this claim is even if you take this narrative literally, so you think there actually was a historical Cain, and even if you take the flood narrative literally, so there actually was a global flood that wiped out everybody but 8 people, how would the line of Cain be preserved through that population bottleneck?
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. You've only got these 8 people, so and of those, you've got 4 males, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So even if you take all this literally, you don't have a male founder to preserve the line of Cain through this event. And that's the genealogical line. Hypothetically, you could have a little bit of DNA from Cain get through that bottleneck, but the line of Cain itself ceased to exist with the flood, if you take all this literally. Also, we don't, even if some DNA did survive, we don't have any evidence that Cain passed on evilness to his descendants as a matter of heredity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the line of Cain was not the best line, the way Genesis describes it. I mean, you can point to his descendant Lamech, who was also not the best guy, the way Genesis portrays him. But 2 bad guys out of a line does not mean the whole line is genetically evil, as opposed to you just have a bad culture, bad upbringing. in this line. Today we have this nature-nurture distinction, and they were not nearly as clear about that in the ancient world, but you certainly can't say, because Genesis doesn't say, oh, well, you had these two bad guys in this line, therefore it must be genetic. That's bad reasoning. So I don't think the argument that any such race would be descended from Cain is plausible. I also don't think the idea of giants being responsible is really in play here either. Now, for reasons I'll explain. Now, where the idea of giants is coming from is there was a widespread belief in ancient Judaism that at a certain point in history, there were angels who went bad and married human women and fathered offspring, and their offspring were giants, and the giants did cause a lot of problems. They were bad. And there's, number one, a question about how literally do you take this account. I don't see evidence that this happened if anything like it did happen, it wouldn't, if you went back in a time machine, you wouldn't see it happen exactly like that. This pertains to the period before the flood in Genesis, and that part of Genesis is so highly stylized. The church acknowledges that the early chapters of Genesis use symbolic language. There may be something this is really communicating, but it would be highly symbolized in Genesis. So I don't think you can say, well, these giants were intrinsically bad and have propagated their genes down to today. Now, the Israelites did meet some people when they came into the promised land that they perceived as giants. Goliath was one of them. They weren't giant by our standards. We think of giants as, 7, 8 or more feet tall, and the average Israelite back then was only 5'5". So anyone who is just 6, I would be considered a giant by ancient Israelite standards, and I'm only like 6 feet. So those kinds of people do exist. Giants of that kind do exist, but there's no association between the genes that give you height and the genes that make you have antisocial personality disorder. Not as far as I've been able to establish. So I don't think, to answer YouTube Binge's question, not only do I think there are problems appealing to Cain or the giants from Genesis or the later giants from the Book of Numbers, I don't think there is, to quote YouTube Binge, I don't think there is, as some people think, a race of folks who are inherently evil through their DNA because they're descended from these people. In fact, I don't think there is a race of folks who are inherently evil through their DNA. Now, we have to be careful about what do we mean by race, and in its broadest signification, it just means a group of common origin. Well, okay, so what size group are we talking about? If you just mean a family line where people have, genes that promote sociopathy or lack of empathy or antisocial personality disorder, sure, there are a bunch of those in the world. There are a bunch of family lines where you've got some problematic genes, whether it's for the conditions I just named or other conditions, and they get passed down in the line. But they don't make people inherently evil. They create challenges that people in that family have to deal with, but they don't make them inherently evil. These are other of God's children who happen to inherit certain problems, and we've all inherited problems. And we all have to deal with those. But God loves us all, and there aren't any humans where the whole family or the whole clan or the whole tribe or whatever are just inherently evil. We have to, and certainly not because they're descended from these groups, we have to treat everybody individually as this is something that Jeremiah and Ezekiel both stress, that it's the individual and the individual's actions, not their lineage, that is important to evaluating their moral status.
All right. Thank you very much for the question, YouTube Binge Q1P. Was the Cain theory, that racist one, was it connected mostly with the slave trade and justifying the slave trade? Oh, that's where the...
Yep. It's also stupid because for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
One of them is the text does not say the mark was black skin. Putting a mark on someone in the ancient world meant branding them.
Oh.
And also, the mark was to protect Cain. If it was black skin, the message would be, don't mess with black people. So this is just doubly stupid.
Racism generally is. All right, we'll be, not generally, universally is. We'll be right back with more weird questions for Jimmy Akin right after this. Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Lots of people have big questions about Catholicism. It needs a big book of answers, and now it's got one. The Big Book of Catholic Answers is filled with helpful replies to more than 250 questions about the faith. Questions about God, salvation history, the Creed, the Bible, the list goes on and on. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
We hope that one of the things that we communicate here at Catholic Answers Live is that our Catholic faith allows us to be fully serious about all the problems we encounter in the church and in the world, but it also lets us have light hearts and maybe even mix in a bit of fun, and that is exactly what our good friend Joe Heschmeyer does in his popular podcast, Shameless Popery. You should check it out at shamelessjoe.com. Joe's got a deep grasp of the faith, morals, the teachings of the church, all that, but he's also got a witty conversational style. He entertains and he informs, but you will leave equipped to better answer the most common challenges, misconceptions, and questions about the Catholic faith. He's got insightful guests, he does on-air debates, and he takes a close look into all the things that you want to know about as a Catholic living today. You'll walk away knowledgeable and filled with joy. Look for Joe on his YouTube channel. Check him out at shamelessjoe.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, become a patron. Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. If you're one of those people that, and there are many like this, like, I have a weird question and I just don't know who to ask my weird question of. Well, we provide you an hour, maybe, I don't know, not quite monthly, or a couple hours usually, to ask your weird questions of Jimmy Akin. And some people have done that. Next one comes from Ishmael Salazar 3969. Why do you think Jesus instituted the Eucharist with bread and wine instead of something like lamb meat and blood?
Okay, so one reason he didn't institute it with lamb meat and blood is that blood was a forbidden food in ancient Israel. So he wouldn't use that. He wouldn't say, okay, go get a lamb, go to the temple, cut its throat, collect the blood, bring it back, and then we're going to transubstantiate it into my blood, because ancient Jews would not have drunk blood to begin with. So that makes a blood for wine substitution reasonable. Also, lamb meat was meat, and that means it was not always accessible. Passover was a special occasion, and if you didn't have, you can afford a lamb once a year, or
Right.
at least at least have the meal with a family that can afford a lamb, or y'all can go halvesies on the lamb. So, a once a year requirement is something that is much more manageable if it involves meat than something you do constantly. So that leads to a second point, which is bread and wine are the most accessible foods. I mean, bread after the beginning of the Neolithic with the agricultural revolution, bread became in the Western world the dominant foodstuff, to where, like, basically in New Testament Greek, the word for food is arton, and the word for bread is arton. So the word for bread was such a dominant food that they would use bread to just mean food. Kind of the way here in the South we use the word Coke to refer to every carbonated beverage. Whether it's like, okay, would you like a Coke? Yes. What kind of Coke would you like? I'd like a Dr. Pepper.
Yeah, right.
And so bread was the archetypal food, the way Coke is the archetypal carbonated beverage. Okay, so these are the bread and wine are the most common food and drinks. You might think water would be, but it wasn't preferred. It was very common, but it wasn't preferred because they didn't have good sources of purified water. In fact, water purification technology hadn't really been invented yet in this period. And so people would prefer to drink wine because, even though they didn't know the reason, wine, and they did know about drunkenness, but in terms of making it a staple that you're drinking with meals as opposed to getting drunk, wine has alcohol in it, which kills microorganisms, and you get food poisoning a lot less if you drink wine. So these were the most easily accessible foods, and here's where I think is the real reason that Jesus chose them. They were the most ordinary foods. And there's, I think, a theological lesson in here about God can take the most ordinary stuff and turn it into vessels of his grace. And so he can take the most ordinary foods, just bread and wine, and turn them into the body and blood of his son. So I think that's what's going on there.
Hey, Ishmael, thank you very much for that weird question. Reginald,
call him Ishmael.
And I did call him Ishmael.
Yeah. Little Herman Melville reference there.
Right. Reginald O'Donohue wants to know this. Is it theoretically possible? I always have a strong sense anyways how Jimmy is going to answer, is it theoretically possible? But here we go. Is it theoretically possible for the saints to save everyone through time travel prayer so that hell ends up being empty?
Well, so theoretically possible means in theory, as opposed to does it conflict with data that we know from the real world. And anytime you're asking is something theoretically possible, it means could God bring it about? And because God is omnipotent, he can bring about anything that doesn't involve a logical contradiction. The idea of everyone being saved through prayer, and time travel prayer is a term that I use to refer to praying for events in the past. So, like, could Christian saints pray for people who were alive, that in their dying moments they would turn to God, even if it's in a way people around them didn't perceive? And so could they end up being saved? Well, sure, it's theoretically possible. Now, there are a number of potential challenges, and if that happened, then hell would end up being empty, at least of humans. Demons are a whole other thing, but hell would be empty of humans if all humans repented due to people praying for them, even if the people who were praying for them were in their future. But there are some complications here. One is that would also require everyone who is prayed for to cooperate with the grace they were given, because God gave us free will, and he does not force our decision. And so on some versions of Catholic theology, like Thomism, God gives certain individuals an efficacious grace that brings about the person's cooperation with it. And that's the challenge for this view. If that view is true, then God could, in response to people's prayers, give efficacious grace to everyone in world history. The challenge is this doesn't really look like it's free will, though.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
now Thomas will say it is, but if it automatically brings about their cooperation, how is it free? So there's a challenge for that view. So I would say that even though, then there's a second issue. Now that we're reintroducing real world considerations, many people are of the opinion that the church teaches that certain individuals in the real world are damned, like, let's say, Judas Iscariot. And Judas, I pick him because he's the best argument that they have, because Jesus says it would be better for Judas not to have been born than for him to betray the Son of Man, and they infer from that Judas must be damned. Well, I acknowledge that is the strongest case they have for someone being damned. Now, the church has not infallibly defined that anyone is in hell, so you could, even if you think the church teaches that some people are definitely in hell, that's open to discussion. On the other hand, at least it's not closed in the way it would be if it were infallibly taught. But if you think that someone like Judas is definitely 100% in hell, then it would not be, and we're not talking theoretically possible here now, but actual possibility, it would not actually be possible for hell to be empty due to people praying for others, because Judas would have to be lost. On the other hand, I've looked at the arguments for Judas's damnation, and I agree with Pope Benedict XVI. His view was that we don't really know whether Judas was damned, and we need to leave that up to God rather than substitute ourselves in his place as judge, because there are other interpretations of what Jesus said or what Jesus meant by what he said, and Matthew flat out says Judas repented. So even if Jesus was saying, yeah, he would be damned, he's presupposing if he doesn't repent. He's not saying, and Judas is never going to repent. And so I think that, is it hypothetically possible? Yeah, God could give grace to everybody, but they might not cooperate with that grace. But they could, in which case it would be theoretically possible for hell to be empty due to the prayers of the saints across time. On the other hand, there are additional barriers that this would have to surmount if you were proposing it as an actual possibility rather than a theoretical possibility.
And we will leave that there. We got to take a break. Reginald, thank you very much for the question. Weird questions for Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and his gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
Why do we need to pray? Well, the Catholic faith is all about communion with God. And prayer is the form that our communion with God takes. If we're not praying, we're not in communion with God. But we can get in communion with God really quickly by prayer. It's the easiest, quickest, and only route to connect to our Creator. And that's what we're made for. That's why we need to pray.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Oh, you thought that was all the weird questions we could come up with? No. We got plenty of weird questions today, and we got Jimmy Akin here to answer them. This one comes from Kyle. Kyle wants to know, do some Catholic priests perform remote viewing on people during confession? Padre Pio or the Cure of Ars, for example.
Okay, so here I need to define some terms. So remote viewing is a recent term. It was coined in the 1970s by Ingo Swann and Hal Puthoff, if I recall correctly. And it's basically, it can be used different ways, but it basically overlaps with the historic term clairvoyance. By the 20th century, and the term clairvoyance has changed meaning over time, but basically by the 20th century, it referred to a particular form of extrasensory perception, or ESP. I need to explain that. ESP is the acquisition of information that you have no normal way of knowing. So you don't learn it through the senses. That's why it's called extrasensory, because extra is Latin for outside. And so it's information you get from outside the senses. It's not an additional sense. That's not what extra means here. It means from not using the senses, you still get the information. And over the course of the 20th century, it was discerned that there are three principal types of ESP that are reported. Whether they exist is another matter, but this is what's reported. One form is telepathy. Telepathy is information that you apparently get from another person's mind. Like if someone's thinking of something and you don't have any other way of knowing it, but you have an insight into what they're thinking, and it's not like you're calculating or guessing or reading their tells or anything like that. If you're genuinely getting it, like let's suppose let's suppose we do an experiment with you and Missy, Psychelid.
Okay.
So we put you in one room, we put Missy in another room, and so you have no sensory contact with each other. And then periodically, we take a thumbtack and jam it into your skin. And then we monitor Missy's pulse rate and her other biomarkers to see if they respond whenever we poke a thumbtack into her loved one.
Yes. Okay.
And if she does respond, then that could look like she's getting the information, the pain you're feeling from your mind, because there's no sensory contact. You're in different rooms. Okay. So that is telepathy, mind to mind contact. Clairvoyance is mind to place contact, where you're getting information from a distant or hidden location, not from somebody's mind.
I got you.
And so like if I say, I want you to view this target, and I give you a target number, and you start describing the Eiffel Tower, well, then you would be getting information about the Eiffel Tower, not knowing that it was the target, through clairvoyance. And that's what remote viewing essentially is. Now, you can use the term a little differently, but basically remote viewing is the same thing as clairvoyance, or at least it's an application of clairvoyance. Then the third form, so the first, telepathy, is mind to mind. The second, clairvoyance, is mind to place. And then the third is precognition, which is mind to time, where you're getting information about another time, usually the future, also possibly the past. So these are the three commonly reported forms of ESP. And so Kyle is asking, do some Catholic priests perform remote viewing, which would be clairvoyance, on people during confession? And he cites Padre Pio and the Cure of Ars as examples. Well, okay, what would it mean to be using clairvoyance on the person during a confession? Well, okay, it would mean I'm in one, let's say we're in a classical confessional. So if I'm the priest, I'm in one compartment within the classical confessional, and in the next compartment, on the other side of the screen, there is a penitent. And of course, because of the screen, I can't see the person, at least not clearly. And I could use clairvoyance to say, what does the person look like on the other side of the screen? That's a distant or hidden thing for me. But that's all I could get. If I'm using clairvoyance, that's a real-time ESP application. I'm describing the thing as it is now. And so that wouldn't tell me anything about, like, has this person confessed all of their sins? So I would say they're not remote viewing the person. They're not using clairvoyance on the person. They might be using another psychic function that is relevant to the confessional experience. Like, they may be using telepathy on the person and realizing this person hasn't told me everything. They're holding something back, or they've forgotten something, and I'm sensing it from them. So this would be mind-to-mind contact, but and to me, that's a more plausible ESP application that could fit some of the experiences that Padre Pio and the Curé of Ars and other priests have had. Also, we're leaving aside the question, did God cause them to have this telepathy? The causality is a whole separate question, but in terms of describing the experience, telepathy looks more plausible to me. Also, it could be retrocognition, or backwards directed precognition. If you somehow could view the past and see, wait a minute, there was this other thing you did, that could be explained by retrocognition, which is sometimes classed as a form of precognition, but I think telepathy is more likely. It also could be what's sometimes called general ESP, where you can't really tell which of these abilities is being used, but something beyond what's normal seems to be happening. So I think if I were to explain some of the experiences where like, someone confesses, I did the following things, and Padre Pio says, what about this other thing you did? And the person says, well, I thought that was okay. And he says, you could have asked first. He's having knowledge of these events, and it seems to me that you could say that's general ESP, or you could say it's retrocognition, but I would tend to say it's telepathy.
Kyle, thank you very much for that question. Let's go to Jacob's question. Jimmy takes all questions. He really does. Jacob says this: how many bison have been sucked into tornadoes?
Well, we don't have good information on this. We have no, and I've checked, we have no reliable reports of bison being sucked into tornadoes.
Thank you for checking.
It's also unlikely to happen because bison are pretty heavy, so it's going to require pretty powerful wind to suck them up off the ground. And of course, that's not a problem for a tornado. I mean, tornadoes are really powerful winds, but the thing about bison is they don't like being sucked up into tornadoes. In fact, they don't like storms. They're going to run away when they sense a storm or a tornado coming. And so it's unlikely to happen for that reason, which may be part of why we don't have any reliable records of it happening. I would say that it is possible there were bison in the past, back when we had big, huge, enormous herds of bison here in North America. And because they were all packed in together, they might not have been able to run away fast enough. And maybe back then some of them got sucked up into a tornado, but at least today we don't have any reliable records of it happening.
But gosh, thanks for asking, Jacob. Thanks very much. What an opportunity for us. OMY323 asks this: is the angel of the Lord in the Old Testament Jesus?
The answer to this is a subject of debate, and I hesitate to come down super firmly on any side. There are, if you look across the canon of Scripture, there are a number of references to an angel of the Lord, or the angel of the Lord in Greek, where it is clearly not Jesus. On the other hand, when you look at the Old Testament in particular, there are a number of references where the angel of the Lord seems to speak with the voice of God. So it'll be like, the angel of the Lord did this, and then Abraham did this, and then God said, and the angel of the Lord is the only person here. And so it looks like there's a duality between the angel of the Lord is somehow distinct from God, and yet the angel of the Lord is somehow also God. And this fed in to a belief system in Second Temple Judaism, known as the two powers. Today it's called the two powers in heaven doctrine. That there was some kind of duality with God. That he and his angel the angel of the Lord is sort of divine, but distinct from God yet, and this also pops up in common interpretations of Daniel, where you have the Son of Man being brought to the Ancient of Days on the clouds of heaven, riding the clouds. That's something God does. And so the Son of Man that's brought, or the one like a Son of Man that's brought before God, looks like he's divine, but yet he's also somehow distinct from the Father. And Jesus then identified himself as that Son of Man. And so Christians have picked up on the two powers in heaven doctrine, and it sort of was historically a foundation for the doctrine of the Trinity. So then that raises the question of, well, that's how these texts, like in Genesis, which features the angel of the Lord, that's how they were understood in the Second Temple period. What did they mean to the original writers? Well, I think the Second Temple period interpretation of them, including the Christian interpretation, is a legitimate interpretation. But I'm a little more cautious about saying that's what it meant to the original audience, which is what the literal sense of the text would be, as opposed to the spiritual sense. So I think absolutely Jesus is present here in the spiritual text, in the spiritual sense of the text. When it comes to these angel of the Lord passages, what I'm less certain of is that it's always there. This divine angel idea is always there in the literal sense. So I tend to be cautious here, but I'm open.
Do you want me to give you another question? We got about
Sure.
3 minutes. Give you another one? All right.
Yep.
Thank you, OMY, for that question. This one comes from Larry. Opinion question. Assuming human beings on Earth are the only intelligent life in creation, if a total extinction event were to occur, would you expect time in this reality to continue on, our sun eventually maturing into a red giant, etc., or would you expect the general physical resurrection to be triggered by the last human death?
I would expect the general human resurrection to be triggered before the last human death, because St. Paul envisions, now he's not asserting, because he doesn't really consider this possibility, but he asserts that he indicates or suggests that there will still be people alive at the time of the second coming. So I would say that if we're the only intelligent creatures in creation, and if a total extinction event was going to occur, that the second coming would happen before humanity was completely extinct, and then he would return.
Wow, I was like, can we get one more question? And now I'm like, can we get two more questions in? But I don't think we can.
I can be concise when I need to be.
You really were on that one. So I forget who that was that asked that question. Oh,
Larry.
that was Larry. Larry, thank you very much for that question. If you go to Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, this week dropped the 400th episode. Last week dropped the 400th episode. Today, the 401th episode. Tell me the two episodes again. What do we got for 400 and 401?
So 400 was listeners' mysterious experiences being analyzed, and so weird things that happen to listeners. 401 is on a couple of very recent studies of animal after-death communications.
Oh, okay. How weird did the people's weird experiences get? Was it pretty out there?
Oh, we had a wide range of different weird experiences. Nothing that I couldn't fit into an overall category and at least say, well, if something, paranormal happened here, here's what it would have been. This is the category it would have gone in.
I got you.
But I also proposed normal explanations and said, wouldn't necessarily be paranormal, because here are some normal explanations that could produce the same effect.
Check out each Friday, get a new episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, mysterious.fm, wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. And you can get a new episode each Monday of the Jimmy Akin podcast, and you can go just search for Jimmy Akin on YouTube. That's his YouTube channel, or get it wherever you get your podcasts. That will do it for us. We will see you next time, God willing, right here on Catholic Answers Live.